Alright, so in this video I'm going to introduce you to the idea of how our reality is built via the interaction of the individual interacting with what is unknown to the individual and the individual using that raw material, processing that raw material through the process of thinking, through the process of learning, and then turning that raw material into information that the individual can then use to guide his or her behaviors in the real world. And so we're going to start by just explaining the process in detail. So, each individual's reality is constructed first by the available information or potential knowledge that can be gathered by an individual. This is known as the data input or grammar phase. Once the available information is gathered as random data by the individual then enters the data into the individual's mind. The individual begins to process the data. And they do this to gain understanding, to extract the order out of the chaos. This is the individual's ability to think or to learn. And our understanding is based upon the quality of the information that's available to the individual, the amount of information that's available, and the amount of information that the individual chose to process, and the individual's ability to actually process that information itself. And so what that's known as is the data processing or logic phase. Once the course of action is then decided upon, based upon the individual's understanding of the inputted information, the individual takes an action or outputs in the real world. This is recorded as our behavior or actions and is known as the data output or rhetoric phase. Each individual's behavior is based upon the quality of their decision-making processes, which in turn is based upon the quality of their available information. This process creates a generated result or manifested reality and is recorded as our behavior. And this process ultimately determines whether order or chaos is generated. We'll be talking about order or chaos in later videos, but order or chaos just means whether you got what you wanted or whether you didn't get what you wanted out of the thing that you manifested. So, if we took in enough information and processed that information properly, then we generate order in our lives. We created what we wanted to create. If we didn't take in enough information and or didn't process the information properly, then we generate chaos in our lives. We generate what we didn't want to manifest in our lives. So, this is how our reality is built. Data input, processing, information output. So data becomes information with formation. We've talked about this before. Data with form. Data is formed by processing the data, thinking and organizing the data into meaningful patterns, which gives the data form and structure. The information that can be then output into the real world or utilized by the individual to enhance or give the individual a better opportunity for success. So, here's just a simple example of a normal, typical college student with a history major, and like myself, and he has to write a term paper about the Peloponnesian War. And so, the outputted result, that the manifested result that the college student wants to make is a term paper based upon the Peloponnesian War. That's the manifested result that they want, okay? That's the goal. That's the idea that they want to create. So, where do you start from there? Well, you do a simple internet search about the Peloponnesian War. And what you see is that you get 3.19 million results when you search for the Peloponnesian War. That's way too much information. So you do what any normal, self-respecting college student would do. You go to the Wikipedia page, and that now narrows your search result down to just one page. And then, if you're content with what's on the Wikipedia page, great. But you can also go down to the references section on the Wikipedia page, and what you'll see there is a whole bunch of books and resources and articles and journals about the Peloponnesian War that you can also use as your access to available information. And so let's say you're a good student like myself, and you pick out a couple of books. You pick out a contemporary book, a modern book about the Peloponnesian War, Donald Kagan's Peloponnesian War book, and then you also take out a book that is sourced back then, which would be Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. And you select those, because they look like they'd be most meaningful, that they would have the most quality information that's available for you. And so what that does is if you actually input that information, which means that you actually read those books, if you decide to input that information, what those two books do is that it broadens your available information and improves your information. It makes your information more quality. And all of that then gives us the result of a higher probability of a successful or quality output. So we're going to say that you do that. You check out those two books at the public library. And so now your available information is those two books and the Wikipedia page. So if you're satisfied with that amount of available information, great, okay? Now we're on phase 2, which is the processing of the information, data processing. So processing the information just means that you allow the information to enter your mind. It just means you read the books. You take notes about the books. You start an outline. You start processing this information into meaningful patterns that you can utilize to write your paper, to create the outcome that you want. And so once you complete the processing of the information, once you read the books, once you take the notes, once you write the outline, you're now ready to manifest the original goal of writing the term paper. Okay? And so that's the ultimate goal. That's what all of this is about. Manifestation, creating something, doing something with the information that you have processed, taking action in the real world. Okay? And so you have to do that. If you read those books and if you know and you've processed all that information and you have a very great understanding of the history of the Peloponnesian War, well, and then you choose to not write the term paper, well, then that means you failed. It doesn't matter how much you know about the Peloponnesian War. You still had to execute or act in the real world to show everyone how much you know about whatever topic you're studying, whatever thing you're trying to learn. And so, as you should be able to see, your term paper is completely dependent upon your ability to process the information, which in turn is completely dependent upon the quality of information that was inputted to be processed. And so, we're just going to do some basic logic right here. We're going to do a simple table. If you have quality, available information, and quality processing abilities, then it follows that you will generate a quality term paper. That's manifested order. However, if you had poor available information and poor processing abilities, then it follows that you will generate a poor term paper. That's manifested chaos. If you had poor available information and quality processing abilities, well, guess what? You still manifest more, you have a high probability of manifesting a poor term paper, manifested chaos. Likewise, if you had quality available information and poor processing abilities, then it follows that you will also still manifest a poor term paper, manifested chaos. So, therefore, there's only one way to generate manifested order in your life. You need access to quality available information and you need quality processing abilities. And this is the process by which all things become manifested in the physical world, not just term papers, all things. And so you have to first have access to available information about the thing that you want to manifest. Second, then you need to have quality processing abilities to process that information. And then third, you have to take action in the real world and generate that which you want to create. Everything you create, everything that you manifest must come into creation in this order. Trying to take action before inputting or processing the information is a fool's errand because what will manifest will be chaos. So going back to our example of writing the term paper on the Peloponnesian War, if you didn't input any information on the Peloponnesian War and just wrote a term paper based upon no available information, I think we all can agree that that term paper is going to come out as pure nonsense because you're not basing the term paper on any previously processed information about the topic. And I feel like this is just one of these moments where I just said something that is blatantly obvious. And, just like to remind people that I don't say anything that's not totally obvious for the most part. And so, if we think about this outside of writing term papers and we just think about our general success, why would you expect to have any quality physical manifestation to occur in your life without first accessing available information about the thing that you want to manifest? Okay? And so the beauty of our existence in 2019 is that we have access to nearly all of the information of the entire human race literally in our pockets. Access to available information is not our problem these days. That was our great-grandparents' problem. They didn't have access to the amount of information that we have today. Where we have a problem today is actually processing that amount of information, processing the information, and then also outputting in the real world. So, in education, processing information is known as critical thinking. Critical thinking is the application of logic. This is rigorous standards of evidence. This is careful reasoning from first principles. And so, herein lies the problem. The problem of our day, really, is that we were never taught how to think. We were always taught what to think. We were never taught how to process information. And so, when we experience information out there, we actually end up experiencing information overload. Going back to our example, 3.19 million results when I type in a search bar, history of the Peloponnesian War, or just the Peloponnesian War. But the point is, about this information overload issue is that if somebody explained how to actually sift through this information, how to critically think about this information, what you'd find is that the vast majority of that information out there is worthless, is meaningless, is useless to us. And so we look at that information, we say that's poor information, and we can quickly decipher what is quality information and what is not quality information. And so we don't actually have to go through all of this wealth of information if we know where to find the quality information, the diamonds in the rough. Because there's only really an itty-bitty amount of quality information out there. Everything else is just clickbait nonsense. And we'll talk about this much later on. There's quite a bit more that we have to talk about first. So, once we can quickly determine quality information from crappy information, we can then use our ability to think and to sift through the data structures of the quality information and then organize that data into meaningful patterns of information. Meaning is created by this process for the individual and is determined by the application of that information. The more successful a pattern that we create, the more successful that a pattern that we create is, the more meaning, the more purpose, and the more useful the pattern is for us to apply in the real world, to utilize for our success. And so we have to learn how to think, because if our processing abilities are poor, then our output will be manifested chaos, no matter how quality our access to available information is. And right now, you can't get much better than what it is today. But in other words, there are courses online that teach us how to be successful. There are video after video after video about how to start a business, how to learn Amazon FBA, how to start a Shopify store, how to create an online course for yourself to sell, and internet marketing courses and Facebook ads and all of this stuff, any business stuff, anything that's occurring in your lives, anything that you try to create you will end up creating chaos if you don't know how to process the information. And still also output into the real world. And so let's talk about outputting into the real world, because, I really suggest that people stop thinking so much in the first place, but you should really consider stop thinking if you're not going to apply what you think to the real world. So if you don't apply what you think about to the real world, then thinking kind of becomes useless. And so what I'm saying is that thinking is for taking action. It's taking action in the real world. And so outputting in the real world. So if you're not going, the point of me saying this is that if you're not going to utilize what you're thinking about to help determine your behavior, then you're actually abusing humanity's greatest tool for success. So again, thinking is for taking action. Thinking gets a bad reputation with many people, mostly like gurus and people who like to meditate and stuff. They say just stop thinking, because everything that we're thinking about on a day-to-day basis, if you ask the average individual, they're thinking about things that do not matter, that do not apply to you taking action in the real world. We're thinking about the mean thing that one of our friends said to us, or we're thinking about celebrities or other people that we've never met before. We're also obsessing about politics all the time. And that's not what thinking is for. Thinking was never meant to be used for that stuff. That stuff is not very meaningful for our actions in the real world. And so I would just like to take a moment to imagine being given humanity's greatest computer in existence, one of the supercomputers that has it's giant and it has all these massive amounts of processing abilities and all of that stuff. Imagine having that, and then you taking that gift for free and utilizing it to play Pokemon Go. Well, for a lot of us, we don't have to imagine that, because that's reality. And that's, to me, is insane. Because, again, thinking is for taking action. And so I suggest that we stop abusing this gift that we have, and we stop obsessing about other things that don't really matter to our reality, and then we start, as opposed to just not thinking at all and just being, open to whatever is occurring around ourselves. I would suggest, actually, instead, to start utilizing our thought processing abilities to start obsessing about things that we do have control over, things that do matter to our reality. And so this is why I always say, I tell people to journal all the time, because journaling is part of the process of starting to become obsessed with the actions that you're taking in the real world. Because when you're journaling about yourself, you're just writing about your day and what you did during that day, your actions during that day, how you felt about those actions, your feelings and your thoughts. And that's all there is. That's the 3 aspects of consciousness. And so when you journal, when you specify a particular time of the day where you're just going to work on whatever, you're just going to, rehash what you did during the day, it starts to force you to become obsessed with yourself, obsessed with the one thing in reality that you do have control over, which is your actions in the real world. And that's what, you should consider, start really caring about. Because, again, thinking about my actions, because really my actions are the only actions that matter to me and to my success, because they are the only actions in the entire universe that I have control over. And the wonderful thing about that is that it just so happens that the one thing that I have control over, my actions in the real world, is also the one thing in our entire universe that I need to have control over in order to be successful. So, the only actions that I have control over also just so happen to be the only thing that determines my success. And that's why I do my best every single day to think about my actions in the real world and how they affect other people, or me outputting in the real world. And at the end of the day, our actions in the real world is what this is all about. And we'll be talking about that a whole lot later on. So again, just to reiterate in summary, data input, processing, information output. If you stop at processing and don't output information into the real world, then you're wasting your time. You're becoming one of those ivory tower intellectuals who don't do anything with their lives, who you can tell don't have that much value. They don't share that much value to society because they're not very successful. They live in their little institutions making like $50,000 a year, complaining about how little they make, while not producing a darn thing for society, not producing anything. That's a straight, surefire way to be not successful as humans, because humans are producers. We are creators. That's what we do. That's what we love to do. That's what makes us happy. And so, I'd much rather you be a less intelligent person, process less information, if it meant that you actually would take action in the real world. And so going back to our Peloponnesian War example again, I suggested the Wikipedia page in 2 books, okay? And that's all that I suggested in the sea of 3.19 million other search results that you could look at. And that's also rejecting all the other articles, the scientific peer-reviewed historian, society, whatever nonsense articles as well, because there's such a thing as information overload. And when you have a goal, an idea, a task at hand, and it has a due date, you have to execute before that due date, okay? And that means that you have to write the term paper and manifest the term paper, because that's what this is all about, okay? So don't get stuck in the processing phase once we go in and start to understand what the processing phase is, what learning actually is. okay? Because I've fallen into that trap before. You start getting obsessed. It starts feeling good that you're learning all of this stuff, and you're getting your mind blown by reading certain books written by like Nietzsche or Jung or whoever, Aristotle, and it starts blowing your mind. And you can't believe that this guy wrote something so amazing like 3,000 years ago. It's mind-blowing. And you forget that you're not actually taking action in the real world. You forget that you're reading somebody else's creations and you're not creating yourself, okay? And so, also, just a side note, if you're a college student, you're listening to this and you're like, but I need all of these sources, I need to cite all of these things. Well, just look at Donald Kagan's sources, okay? And you read Donald Kagan's book, right? And he cited all of these sources. Just use his sources, Just make sure that you have access to that information, because like, what's the point? You read his book, he cited those things. That means that you read his sources. That means, ergo, that means that those are your sources as well, okay? Get over it. Write out the paper, cheat the system. It's school, it's not important, okay? We have to move on from school and accept school for what it is, It's just a place to meet friends and get drunk, okay? It's just not what it used to be. That's why I'm out here talking about the stuff that they should be talking about in college, okay? But that's really not the point, though, okay? Somebody asked me that last time I was telling them about this. They're like, I need sources. And I'm like, no, you don't, because Donald Kagan got you covered, okay? So the point is that you could spend the rest of your life reading about a few semi-interesting things that occurred in a few interesting years in Greek history. But that doesn't do a darn thing for your success. Your success is predicated on you writing the term paper in that particular moment. Your success for business isn't about how many business books you read. It's not about how much information that you study. It's about your business that you actually start. So that's where all of this ends. You have to take actions into the real world, or then you're not manifesting anything, and manifesting nothing is manifested chaos, okay? So, in summary, the only way to manifest good is to have access to quality information, which you do, because we have the internet. And so, then, we have to also have the ability to process that information, which we'll talk about, and then we have to act or create in the physical world, which is all based upon the inputted available information, and then that information being processed, which I cannot do for you. You have to take actions for yourself. You got to do that on your own. I'll talk your ear off about of access to available information, where to find it, where to locate it, what it looks like, and all of that stuff. I'll even talk about how to process that information. We'll talk about logic. We're going to talk about how to think. We're going to talk about all of that stuff, how to critically think, how to reason from first principles. We're going to do all of that. But at the end of the day, the one thing that actually matters for you, I can't do for you. That's taking action in the real world. You got to do that for yourself. And trust me, when you start doing it, you'll never stop, because it is the most enjoyable thing that you can do on the face of the earth. Doing actions, taking actions, creating something. You create something every time you walk during the day. Okay, you're creating the motion of walking, and that's wonderful. Well, how can I enhance that? Well, you can sit down somewhere and create something with your hands, or you could go on the computer, create a website. You can create something that you find useful, and then create a few more of them and try to sell them and learn what that process is all about, because that process is super enjoyable as well. And this is all super rewarding, and it all gives us something to do during the day, which is the most wonderful thing of all, because if you don't have anything to do during the day, then, oh man, that's a fast ticket to depression and feeling very lonely and sad. But if you're forced to sell something, it's very hard to be depressed while you're selling things that you created yourself and that you love and you enjoy, if you're okay with a little bit of rejection along the way. Again, we'll talk about all of this stuff as we move along. I just got to lay the foundation for this stuff, and this process is really the determined foundation by which how we create our reality around ourselves, because this isn't just occurring for things that we manifest, like term papers and businesses and stuff. This is happening at all times as we're existing in this reality. That's why I brought up just walking is a creation. Just doing anything, doing the dishes is creating. It's what we do as humans. And so whether order or chaos is generated in our reality is determined on our ability to process information and then act upon that information. And we'll discuss how to greatly improve the probability of generating positive manifested results in our lives in the following video. where I'll show you how human consciousness, how human emotion, that aspect, actually interacts with this very determined process of reality formation creation. So, we'll do that in the next video, and I'll see you guys there.